A man dies on a Tuesday morning in an Amish farmhouse in Lancaster County. By Thursday afternoon, he is in the ground. No funeral director touched him, no embalming fluid ran through his veins. No one signed a contract for a bronze casket with a 60-year warranty. His neighbors washed his body. His neighbors built his coffin. His neighbors dug the hole. And the entire process, start to finish, cost the family somewhere around $400. The average American funeral runs $7,000 to $10,000. Casket, embalming, viewing room rental, hearse, plot, headstone, the fees stack until grief comes with an invoice attached. The Amish looked at that system a long time ago and simply didn't join it. Not because they can't afford it, because they never built a version of death that needed it. This is how a community with no funeral homes, no embalming, and almost no spending buries thousands of people a year, and does it with more order than most modern funerals manage with all their money. Start with the moment of death itself, because that's where the two systems already split apart. In an English household, when someone dies at home, the instinct is to call for help. Paramedics, a hospice nurse, eventually a funeral home to come collect the body. The family steps back. Professionals step in. In an Amish household, the family steps forward. There's no 911 call for a body that's already gone. No waiting on strangers to arrive with a gurney. The people in that room know exactly what happens next, because they've done it before. For a grandparent, an uncle, a neighbor 3 farms over. Death isn't handed off. It's absorbed by the community that was already standing there. Within an hour, word starts moving. Not through a phone tree, not through a Facebook post, but the way information has always moved through these communities, one buggy at a time, one visit at a time. A neighbor rides to tell another family, that family tells the next. In a large settlement like Lancaster County, which holds more than 40,000 Amish across dozens of church districts, this can look almost like a relay. Somebody's job, unofficially but reliably, is to make sure the right people know within the day. The body stays in the home. This is the detail that surprises most outsiders first. There's no transport to a mortuary, no stainless steel table in a back room somewhere. The deceased remains in the house, usually laid out in the front room or the largest open space, because the home is where the community will gather, and the home is where the deceased will stay until burial. Washing and dressing the body isn't outsourced either. It's done by same-sex family members or close friends, following a rhythm that's been passed down informally for generations. No manual, no course, just women teaching daughters, men teaching sons, by doing it alongside them once and then being ready to do it themselves. The body is washed carefully, dressed in white, the traditional color for Amish burial, regardless of age or the season of the year. A woman is dressed in the same white cape and apron she wore on her wedding day, kept for decades specifically for this. A man is dressed in a plain white shirt and trousers. There's no makeup applied, no attempt to make the body look like it's sleeping. The Amish don't chase that illusion. Death looks like death. And that's accepted rather than disguised. Here's where the biggest structural difference shows up, and it's the one that saves the most money by a wide margin. There's no embalming. In most of the United States, embalming isn't legally required, but funeral homes present it as standard, and most families never question it because they assume it is. Embalming involves draining the body's blood and replacing it with a chemical preservative, primarily formaldehyde, to slow decomposition for days of viewing. It's a chemical process. It takes specialized equipment and licensing, and funeral homes typically charge somewhere between $500 and $1,000 for it, sometimes more. The Amish skip it almost entirely. Instead, they rely on something older and simpler: cold. Historically, that meant literal ice, packed around and sometimes beneath the body to slow the natural process down. Some communities still do this. Others, in recent decades, have adopted a more practical middle ground, hiring a local funeral director for the narrow, specific task of preparing and briefly refrigerating the body, without embalming it and without taking over any of the rest. It's a transaction, not a partnership. The funeral home does one job and steps back out. Because there's no embalming to slow the clock, the timeline compresses hard. A modern American funeral can sit on the calendar for a week or more, while relatives fly in, and the funeral home coordinates schedules. An Amish burial almost never waits that long. Viewing typically happens the day after death, burial the day after that. 2 to 3 days from breath stopping to earth closing over the coffin, occasionally faster. It isn't rushed out of coldness. It's fast because the community is already local, already organized, and because nothing about the process depends on scheduling a room or waiting on a business's calendar. That 2 to 3 day window is also when the community does its heaviest lifting. And this is where the $400 number starts to make sense. Someone in the district, usually a man skilled in woodworking, builds the coffin. Not orders it, builds it. Plain pine, unfinished or lightly stained, hexagonal in the older style still used by some communities, rectangular in others depending on the region. No velvet lining, no polished brass handles, no upgrade tiers. It's built to hold a body with dignity and nothing more, and it's usually finished within a day, sometimes overnight, by someone who has built several before and will build several again. Somebody else digs the grave, not a backhoe operator hired for the job. Neighbors with shovels in the community's own burial ground, because nearly every Amish settlement maintains its own small cemetery, usually attached to a church district rather than a commercial plot sold by the foot. There's no headstone salesman involved either. Markers are simple, small, uniform, often just a plain stone with a name and 2 dates. No epitaphs, no size competition between neighboring graves. The cemetery reads like the community it represents, consistent, understated, nobody standing out. While the men are building and digging, the women are doing the other half of the labor that keeps an Amish funeral running. And it's just as essential, even though it never shows up on an invoice. Food. Dozens of people will be arriving at the house over the next 2 days, and dozens of people will be arriving at the burial, and all of them need to be fed, because that's simply what happens when a community gathers. Neighbors bring dishes without being asked. Someone coordinates who's bringing what, informally, the way it always gets coordinated. And by the time the viewing starts, the kitchen is stocked and the work is already underway for the meal that follows the burial too. This is worth sitting with for a second, because it's the actual engine behind the $400 figure. It's not that Amish funerals are a cheaper version of the same product. It's that almost nothing is being purchased at all. The casket is labor, the grave is labor, the meal is labor. The washing, the dressing, the transportation by horse and wagon to the cemetery, all of it is labor, donated by people who will receive the same labor back when it's their turn. The few $100s that does get spent covers things that can't be done by hand. A small honorarium sometimes given to the local funeral director for the refrigeration step, maybe fabric, maybe a burial permit fee required by the state. Everything else runs on reciprocity instead of currency. The viewing itself looks nothing like a modern funeral home visitation either. There's no receiving line manufactured by a business, no soft lighting rig, no guest book table set up by staff. The body lies in the front room of the house in the open coffin, and for 1 to 2 days, a steady stream of community members comes through. Some communities see hundreds of visitors over that window, not because it's a spectacle, but because the district is large and everyone considers it an obligation to pay respects in person. Visitors sit, they speak quietly with the family, sometimes for just a few minutes, and they leave room for the next arrival. There's no formal program, no eulogy delivered from a podium, because the viewing isn't a performance of grief, it's simply presence. The funeral service, held on the day of burial, is typically conducted in the barn, or the largest available structure on the property, because Amish worship services are already held in homes and barns on a rotating basis, rather than in a dedicated church building. And a funeral follows that same pattern. Benches are brought in, the same backless wooden benches used for regular Sunday services, transported from farm to farm by a dedicated benches wagon that most districts maintain specifically for this purpose. Men sit on one side, women on the other. The same seating division used in every other Amish gathering. The service runs long by outside standards, often 2 to 3 hours, conducted in Pennsylvania Dutch and High German rather than English, made up of hymn singing without instruments, scripture reading, and 2 sermons delivered by ministers from within the community, unpaid because there's no clergy salary in Amish church structure at all. There's rarely a personalized eulogy, the way an English funeral has one. The sermons focus on the certainty of death, the promise of resurrection, and the importance of living a life prepared for it. Not a highlight reel of the deceased's accomplishments. It's less a funeral about one person and more a funeral about what death means for everyone sitting in that barn. After the service, the procession to the cemetery happens by horse and buggy, sometimes dozens of buggies long, moving at a walking horse's pace down the same country roads these communities have used for generations. At the graveside, the coffin is lowered by hand using ropes by the same men who built it and dug the hole. There's no mechanical lowering device, no green outdoor carpet laid over the dirt pile to hide it from view, no artificial turf pretending the earth isn't right there. The dirt pile stays visible. The grave gets filled in by hand, by shovel, often by the men who are standing closest, right there in front of everyone, while the rest of the community watches and sometimes sings a final hymn. That detail matters more than it might seem at first. In most modern funerals, the actual filling of the grave happens after the family has already left, out of sight, handled by cemetery staff once the crowd disperses. The Amish don't do that separation. The community stays. They watch the grave close. Sometimes they help close it themselves. And there's no illusion that the hard part happens somewhere else, by someone else, once the family's back is turned. After the burial, everyone goes back for the meal the women have been preparing since the day before. This isn't optional or symbolic. It's the final piece of the process, a full communal meal, sometimes for hundreds of people, served in the same barn where the service was held, or in the farmhouse itself. It functions the way the whole 3 days function, as proof that the family isn't facing this alone. Laid out not in words, but in food on a table and people staying in the room. Walk through the cemetery itself, and the plainness starts to say something on its own. Rows of small identical stones, close together, facing the same direction. No family plot roped off with ornamental fencing. No mausoleum on a hill for the wealthier families in the district, because there aren't wealthier families in the district. Not in any way the graveyard is allowed to show. A bishop's grave looks the same as a farmhand's. A child's grave sits in the same row as an elder's, smaller but marked with the same plain stone, same font, same 2 dates. Some older Pennsylvania settlements still bury in unmarked rows entirely, relying on a hand-drawn map kept by the church rather than engraved names, because even a name carved in stone can start to look like a claim to remembrance the community doesn't believe any one person is owed over another. The theology behind it isn't subtle. Pride in death is still pride, and the Amish spend their whole lives trying to stay small in a way that doesn't stop the moment the heart does. That plainness runs against almost everything the American funeral industry is built to sell. Walk into a funeral home showroom and you're shown a room of caskets ranked, without anyone saying it out loud, by how much they cost. Mahogany at the top, steel in the middle, a cardboard or particle board option tucked in a back corner that the staff won't volunteer unless you ask for it directly. Consumer researchers have documented this pattern for years. Families grieving and vulnerable, guided gently toward the model that costs more, because grief is one of the only moments in American commerce where the customer is actively discouraged from comparison shopping. It's not illegal, it's just built to work on people who are in no state to negotiate. The Amish never built a version of this because they never built a marketplace for death to begin with. There's no showroom because there's no sale. State law still reaches into this process more than most outsiders assume, and it's worth being straight about that, instead of pretending the Amish operate in some kind of legal vacuum. Nearly every state requires a death certificate, signed by a physician or coroner, before burial can legally happen, Amish or otherwise. Most states also require a burial permit, a simple form, but a form nonetheless, and someone in the family or the district has to see it through the local registrar's office. Some states require a licensed funeral director to be involved in some capacity, even if that involvement is limited to filing paperwork rather than handling the body. This is exactly why some communities keep a working relationship with a single local funeral home, not to outsource the funeral, but to outsource the specific legal steps that require a license the community doesn't have and doesn't want. It's a narrow transactional relationship. The funeral director signs what needs signing and refrigerates what needs refrigerating, and everything else, every hour of labor that actually constitutes the funeral, stays entirely in the community's hands. Children grow up inside this system long before they're old enough to understand what death means in the abstract. An Amish child will likely attend their first funeral before the age of 10. Will watch a grave get filled by hand before they're taught much of anything else about mortality in a classroom. Because there is no classroom lesson on it, there's only the lived version. By the time that same child is an adult, they've already washed a body or watched it done closely enough to know how. They've eaten dozens of funeral meals. They've sat through hours of German sermons about resurrection without needing a translation anymore. Death, by the time it arrives in their own household, isn't a foreign event handled by strangers in suits. It's a procedure they already know by heart, the same way they know how to run a farm, because it was taught to them the exact same way, by doing it alongside someone older until they were the older one themselves. Even grief itself gets handled differently once the ground closes. There's no formal bereavement leave in Amish life because there's no employer to grant it. Most work is farm work or family trade, and the community simply absorbs the gap left behind. Neighbours take over chores for weeks. Meals keep arriving well past the funeral itself. A widow or widower isn't left to manage a farm alone the following Monday morning because someone is already there Monday morning, without being asked. The same way someone was already there building the coffin 2 days after the death. Grief support isn't a hotline number or a 6-session program run by a counsellor. It's a line of buggies pulling into the drive for the next several weeks, which is its own kind of structured care, just built entirely out of people instead of institutions. If you've been sitting here comparing this to a funeral you've actually been to, That gap between the two is exactly why I started digging into settlements like this in the first place. I ended up gathering the parts of daily Amish life that don't usually make it into a documentary, the things around this custom, rather than just the custom itself, into a small guide called the Amish Almanac. It's not trying to replace anything here, it's just the fuller picture in one place, if that's the kind of thing you're into. Scan the QR on screen, or the links in the description. Anyway, back to it. What's striking, watching this whole process from the outside, is how little of it depends on money changing hands, and how much of it depends on the community simply already knowing its job. There's no committee formed after the fact to figure out who's bringing the casseroles. There's no scramble to find someone who can dig a grave on short notice. Every role in this 3-day process already has someone attached to it before the death even happens. Because everyone in the district has done it before, for someone else. And everyone expects to have it done for them eventually. The system isn't held together by a business, it's held together by the fact that a debt of labor gets repaid over and over across an entire lifetime of neighbors burying neighbors. That reciprocity is also the reason the Amish have never adopted the American funeral industry the way most of the country did in the 20th century. This isn't a rejection built on principle alone. The system it would replace already works, has worked for generations, and costs almost nothing because the currency isn't dollars, it's obligation. Everyone in that community will eventually be the one lying in the front room in a plain pine box. And everyone in that community has already spent years building coffins, digging graves, and cooking meals for someone else's family. Which means the system never runs out of people willing to do it, because doing it is simply what a neighbor does. There's no upsell in an Amish funeral. No one is offered a better casket, a bigger plot, a more elaborate service tier. Grief doesn't get monetized because there's no business in the room capable of monetizing it. What's left, once you strip all of that away, is something a lot closer to what burial probably looked like everywhere a long time before anyone thought to put a price tag on it. A man dies on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, he's in the ground, in a box his neighbor built, in a grave his neighbor dug, under a hymn his community sang without being paid to sing it. Then everyone goes inside and eats a meal that took 2 days to prepare, because that's what happens next, not because a business schedule says so. Because a community that's done this 100 times before knows exactly what comes after burying one of their own.